Hey guys, we're going to continue our discussion on ecological succession, which we defined as a changing sequence of species composition in response to changing environmental conditions. There are two types of ecological succession. Last time we talked about primary succession, and of course this is a succession that begins on a blank canvas or barren rock. It's an ecological succession that takes place over a very long time period. Pioneer species start the process by starting to build soils. Physical and chemical weathering, in conjunction with biologic activity, slowly but surely build up substrate and soils to allow mid-successional species and then followed by late successional species. A very slow process. Today we're going to look at secondary succession, which is basically succession in the fast lane. It's fast because soil is already present. The soil is already there, therefore the platform for life is ready to go. Oftentimes within that soil is already a seed bank to allow germination to take place immediately following a disturbance. So disturbance is what initiates secondary succession. Disturbance can be defined as really any change in environmental condition that disrupts the ecosystem. These disturbances can range from catastrophic to mild. And we often view disturbance with a sort of a negative connotation. Nevertheless, disturbance can actually promote diversity. There's a theory put forth by ecologists known as the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which states that a few small-scale, fairly frequent disturbances like small-scale forest fires, small-scale tree blowdowns, small-scale deforestation can actually promote diversity. It does that by releasing nutrients. As a forest or a tree falls in the forest, it decays, releasing nutrients. That promotes biogeochemical cycling. Sometimes it opens up the canopy in the forest, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor, allowing shade-intolerant species to grow. And ultimately, it creates new ecological niches to be filled by other species. So what initiates secondary succession? Disturbance. One example, of course, is a tree blowdown. You can imagine if a tornado rips through a forest or a small storm, it could blow down a few trees. This picture was taken in the Pacific Northwest, where a very large western cedar blew over. As it dies and decays, it adds the nutrients back to the soil. It opens up the forest canopy, allowing sunlight to reach the understory, allowing other plants to grow in its place. Furthermore, they used, or western hemlock trees, used that western cedar as a nurse log as a platform for growth. Human activities can initiate secondary succession. Deforestation, clear cutting, can actually create disturbance. Now, clear cutting is often a activity that creates negative impacts to the ecosystem. It's never good to clear cut areas on steep slopes. But some wildlife biologists prescribe small cuts to create edge environments. In doing this, it disrupts or breaks up the flow of the forest and allows other species to grow up in exposed sunlight. If you were trying to manage browsing or grazing animals like deer, for example, deer thrive along edge habitats. American Indians knew this. They would prescribe burns to forests or clear-cut areas to create edges. This is where they would actually hang out and hunt because they knew that browsing animals would follow this corridor line along the edge environment. So here's what secondary succession looks like. Again, you always look to the beginning to see what's going on. We know this is secondary succession because the soil is in place, the seed bank is in place, and right away succession begins. It's a fast process. Annual plants, which are then overrun by perennial weeds and grasses, shrubs crowded out by young pine forests, and then finally late successional mature oak hickory trees. So remember, old school ecologists used to predict this succession as an orderly sequence of events trending to the stable climax community. Modern ecologists are now changing their views on this predictable sequence. They argue that it's not predictable. Ecosystems have disturbances all the time, and it's difficult to know when and where they're going to occur. And so in this way, as opposed to a sequence of events, these ecologists argue that there isn't really a climax community. There are mature communities, but when you look at the ecosystem as a whole, it's more of a patchwork of different levels of succession, depending on, well, let's say a forest fire happened there, a tree blowdown happened there, a volcanic eruption happened there. So we have this mosaic of patches, of vegetation of patches, and there isn't really stability. It's never at equilibrium. Disturbance is constantly happening. In its place, ecologists do argue that there is stability to ecosystems. Generally speaking, the more biologically diverse, the more resistant to change they are. There's also resilience. That's the ability to bounce back after disturbance. Usually, ecosystems have one of these two factors, whether it's inertia and persistence, or resistance to change, or resilience, the ability to bounce back. Let's look at an example of each. When we talk about resistance, we typically refer to tropical rainforests. Diversity is the name of the game here. You see one tree species, you could hike for miles and not see that same species again. This diversity creates a really deep genetic bank that offers up a lot of coping strategies and defenses against catastrophic disturbances. And so it does really well in the face of disturbance. If a tree were to blow down, it's still going to look like a tropical rainforest. It is highly resistant to change. Nevertheless, if there is catastrophic change, if humans come along and clear-cut a vast region of tropical rainforest, it has a hard time bouncing back from that disturbance. The reason is that tropical rainforest soils do not have a lot of nutrients. Most of those nutrients are locked up in the biomass of the plants. That's because decomposition happens so quickly. It's a warm, moist climate. Decomposers break stuff down, and it's so competitive that any nutrients that are in the soil quickly become assimilated into the plant biomass. So what happens when you clear cut the forest, you remove the nutrients. Furthermore, it's a rainforest. So when you clear cut it, when it rains, any nutrients that are left over in the soil will quickly wash away or leach out from the soil. This makes recovery very difficult. And oftentimes these tropical rainforests cross thresholds where if you clear cut too much, it won't come back from that disturbance. Low resilience, high resistance. Now, an ecosystem that has low resistance and high resilience are grasslands. Grasslands disturb very easily. We can plow them over. They often succumb to fire. In fact, fire is often required for these ecosystems. It helps to reduce crowding, germinate certain seeds. But nevertheless, it disturbs very easily. So one quick lightning strike and the whole thing goes up in smokes. So it has low resistance to that disturbance. However, immediately following that disturbance, it quickly regenerates. And the reason is that most of the biomass in a grassland is below the surface. It has a complex network of roots. That root structure does not get disturbed from the fire, and therefore while the surface vegetation goes up in smoke, following the fire, it quickly regenerates and resprouts. In this way, it has low resistance but high resilience. That's it for our discussion today, guys. We'll see you next time.